This video is brought to you by Squarespace. In 1997, a revolutionary aircraft took to the skies above Russia, and its wings were the wrong way round. Now, forward-swept wing design wasn't something new, but this might have been the first time that it actually worked. Sukhoi envisioned this to be the future of the Russian Air Force, and more importantly, beat their rivals MiG in the race for the 5th gen jet. Today we're going to explore the story, the hardship, and the engineer's vision behind the jet of tomorrow, the Su-47 Sukhoi. During the 80s, the Soviet Navy had big dreams to conquer the seas, defend the vast Russian coast, and to rival the American Navy power. But to do that, they needed a new state-of-the-art jet. Sukhoi developed a new aircraft named the S-22 and actually dubbed it the Su-27KM to confuse the West. It would be Russia's 5th generation air dominance fighter for the Navy to accompany the Yak-141, a lighter VTOL-capable aircraft. And you bet there's a future video coming for that as well. Up until recently, not much was known about the project, but there was actually a mock-up made at the time, including a very interesting flat exhaust nozzle design choice. But then a change had come for the USSR before Sukhoi could build a prototype, and there were no more fat paychecks to spend on crazy projects. However, Sukhoi Bureau started seeing potential and saved this design and thought that it could be their opportunity to finally beat their rival MiG and reserve their spot in the 5th gen race. But ironically, the tale as old as time doesn't actually start with Russia. The story behind the S-47 and the forward-swept wing design leads back, like nearly all aerospace projects, to the Third Reich. In 1944, the Nazis built a new jet bomber which could outrun enemy fighters at the time, hoping to somehow change the tide of war. It was called the Junkers U-287. The main issue was the amount of stress that was put on the wings, both in terms of bending and twisting during flight. Without composite materials that we have today, the project was doomed from the start, and other advantages of this wing design, like reduced drag and increased maximum speed, couldn't be utilized. But the Allies, including the Russians, took notice, and once an idea is created, it's hard to shake. And it would be the Americans who would finally get this experimental design to work. Speaking of the Russians, they're also working on a new version of the MiG, the MiG-41. But this information wasn't easy to find out because they don't have a website for this top secret project. Squarespace is really the best website builder out there, period. Their websites are already optimized for mobile phones, have the ability to run powerful email campaigns, and they have a fantastic e-commerce tech built right into their framework. So if you need an online store, it's just a couple of clicks. To launch your own site, go to www.squarespace.com/found and get 10% off your first site and domain. Every click that you do today helps, so if you want that warm and fuzzy feeling, click that link to check out perhaps your future website. Thanks again to Squarespace. In 1984, Grumman started an ambitious project on an aircraft called the X-29, and it was a joint NASA and US Air Force project to test the capabilities of forward-swept wing designs for future fighter jets. This time, they would use composite materials like carbon fiber that would be light enough and strong enough to finally allow a real forward-swept wing design to be built. The Russians had been working on a design like this for a very long time, longer than you might think, since World War II with the DBLK, but finally there was a solution available. Around the same time of the Grumman experimental aircraft in the late 80s, the Soviets started two very ambitious programs called the MFI and the LFI. Their task was to create a new multi-role fighter and a light fighter to counter the US's ATF and future JTF programs, which by this point I've covered pretty well on the channel. The famous MiG Bureau won the contract to create a multi-role fighter prototype, which then turned out as the MiG-144. But the Sukhoi had an ace up their sleeve and a vision to follow, and they were not going to give up that contract that easy. They said, if you won't fund the forward swept wing jet, we'll do it ourselves. The leadership of the Sukhoi Bureau decided that they would fund their project internally and beat MiG at its own game, letting the more superior jet aircraft do the talking. Now, this would be a huge gamble on the future of the company, not seen in aviation since Boeing gambled with the creation of the 707, and like Americans, they would build a full prototype first. The aircraft was redesignated as the S-37 and they got to work. By 1997, it was ready to take to the skies. So now let's talk about the most futuristic and most powerful jet the Russians might have ever created. And boy, the engineers went crazy with this aircraft, just like Homer Simpson when he designed his own car. Like the X-29, the flaw of the forward wings were solved with the use of carbon fiber and composite materials. The wings of the Su-47 were around 90% made out of composite materials and allowed the aircraft to have a fighter performance with better fuel consumption because of the lower drag. Large canards were mounted in the front of the wings to help the pilot steer and maneuver the aircraft, and unlike the X-29, the Su-47 was a powerful bird with two Solovyev D-30 F6 engines, providing 93.1 kilonewtons of thrust, each with either 2 or 3D thrust vectoring nozzles. The same engines that were used for the MiG-31, and we know how fast that thing was. This would allow for a max speed of over Mach 2.2 and give the plane the same maneuverability as the Su-35 or F-22, pulling more than 9 Gs without structural damage. The weapons bay was also interesting. Unlike the F-22 or F-35, or even its successor, the Su-57, the one of the Su-47 had a rotating launcher with new R-77 missiles, similar to how cruise missiles are carried on bombers. It would be able to carry additional fuel tanks or go air-to-ground weaponry on a minimum of 2 hardpoints on the wings. It would also have a 30mm cannon that would complement the other weaponry to make it the ultimate air superiority machine. Air ducts were S-shaped to further decrease radar signature, and although we couldn't say that it would be as stealthy as the Raptor, for sure it would have had a slightly decreased RCS compared to 4th gen aircraft. The two tail booms bring up the rear of the aircraft that housed ECM equipment because it couldn't be located on the tips of the wings as traditionally on modern flankers. Some parts, like the landing gear, was actually borrowed from the Su-27 family to cut down production costs, because remember, they were paying for this themselves. But it featured a glass cockpit and steering controls were on the sides, like with the Su-37, which is actually quite uncommon for the Russian aircraft. So in 1997, with this incredible machine built, the Golden Eagle performed its first flight. If it was so superior, why didn't the Russians use it? The jet first went on display to the public at the Max Air Show in 1999. Supersonic tests were completed during the year 2000, and the plane became a testbed for all the new technologies that were developed for a new age of Russian fighters. Initially, it was limited to Mach 1.6, but some sources say that speeds over Mach 2 were achieved with the jet. However, issues with the wings started to plague the aircraft at such speeds, and it was yet another problem to solve with a very limited budget at hand. And in 2001, it was finally redesignated from the S-37 to the Su-47 Berkut. By 2002, over 150 test flights had been carried out to complete various tasks and gather other data, and by this time all the effort that the Bureau had put into the project had finally paid off. After many delays and problems, the MiG-144 was cancelled along with the MFI and LFI programs back in the year 2000, and a new program called the PAC-FAR was started, with Sukhoi being chosen as the contractor because of its success, further developments of the Su-27, financial stability and exports. But the critical factor was the success with the development of the experimental platform such as the Su-47. But as we know today, the PAC-FAR program didn't actually choose the Su-47. Why? The government decided to further push the development of the Su-35 based on the Su-37's experiences and make it Russia's new 4++ Gen Air Superiority Fighter, as they were working on a new stealth aircraft to enter service, and there were also some budget cuts prolonged by the development of the PAC-FAR over many years. The Berkut actually flew for a couple more years, being a testbed for many different technologies, avionics, radars, EW systems, etc. And by the time the Sukhoi finally got the funding and green light from the government for the PAC-FAR program, the design was already outdated and obsolete, and they needed to base their new 5th gen fighter around something more familiar and future-proof. This led to the Su-57 with a more traditional stealth design inspired by the YF-23 and F-22 Raptor, but it was the Su-47 that made it possible for this aircraft to enter serial production and become the first Russian operational stealth fighter in history. In 2009, the legendary Su-47 was finally displayed to the public again, now being a legacy and a testament to the willpower of the engineers and test pilots working for Sukhoi during the 90s and pushing through all the hardships to beat MiG and write the modern history of the Russian Air Force. And there you have it. Maybe it was too complicated and maybe it could never work, but we can definitely say that this one was a win, at least for Sukhoi, and many of us aviation enthusiasts. This was always that design that we would go back to admire and even fear because of its sleek but dangerous look. Thanks for watching, and do svidaniya.